Well, we're back from part one, starting part two. We're doing this in the same day. We're sticking near the 4th of July theme here. And we went downstairs in the Alliance. Once again, we're at the Alliance in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where they bring military and civilian together. Great food, great place, gift shop. They have concerts.
Yeah, I like coming here. I've just recently got my wife to come. Took her to the range that they have. They have one of the best firing ranges in town, in the area, and the food's great. People are always good, so it's nice. I think it's a virtually one of a kind in this country to have this large and nice of a facility, and there are plans for putting in a museum and other things down the road. So it's really a great thing.
Yeah, it is a one of a kind, for sure. And just to mention it, this is the Jimbo, South Dakota channel on YouTube, and this is the Hog House Chronicles. We're not in the Hog House, but we do travel around and do interviews in different places. Was at South Carolina last month, out and back, did 2 podcasts there. And I'm hoping to go to Wisconsin and interview somebody this coming week. So I've got family over there.
Okay.
So anyway, part 2, Larry Tentinger. We've gone from being 2 pounds to 1.75 pounds up to beating the crap out of your brother for payback.
Yeah,
well-deserved payback.
Then a few national records in powerlifting. I just couldn't stop.
Yep.
So now we'll kind of get into the the rest of the story.
Yeah. Couldn't stop powerlifting.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
Keep her going. He's over 70 years old and rolling, still rolling pretty good through all that.
Trying.
And so now, and we've talked about, and these things that we're mentioning, you'd have to go back and see part 1. And up through the Vietnam, getting out, working through your 20s, your 30s, working at 2 educational institutions. Before that, working a real hard, heavy manual labor jobs and choosing to do those. And then up to, 1987, re-enlisting, getting back into the military.
I went back into the military. And again, as we said earlier, I was mobilized right away, Desert Storm. I figured, well, hey, other than a scud going off next to us and one thing blowing up above us, we had to get all checked out for that. When this thing blew up, I was under the umbrella of the fallout from it, and actually got sent to the University of Iowa for about 6 years, every other year, to get tested. And I found out that my handwriting changed. I mean, not my gross motor skill, just things that you hear about rumor-wise, but I tell you for a fact, the stuff was in the air. And I have a set of dog tags I still have from Desert Storm. When Saddam Hussein lit those oil fields on fire, and you could just see the oil dripping off the trucks that come back from up further front than we were. Mm-hmm. I had, my dog tags were tactical. I had the rubber around them. It ate that rubber off.
Really?
Before I left country, it was falling off, and you can just still see it on there yet. So, yeah, we've talked about toxins before.
and the breathing and the coal dust and your uncle
everything.
You're banging on his back.
Yeah, well, I didn't get enough because time went on, and after I get back from Desert Storm, I figured, well, I'm still standing. I'm going to pull my 20. And like all good plans, sometimes things just go astray, they change a little bit. Mm-hmm. One thing that changed for sure is, for me, is that I adhered to my purpose as an NCO to help people get paid and promoted, and the best thing to do is to help others succeed. So there was a young Navy man who wanted to be a corpsman, and he asked me, what do I need to do to get ahead here? I'm just, floating along. And I said, you need to go to a school that is elite, that has some meaning to it, where you can have a role in the Navy unlike other corpsmen. And I said, one of those most elite schools is to become a corpsman with the Marine Corps. And those of you out there that know all this, it's 8404. If you're an 8404 corpsman, you got it. So I go to this school, and I am, like a lot of times, I end up being the oldest person around for everything. I don't know why, but I do. It should be some kind of a signal. Well, because I am one of the highest ranking people in this, because I was already an E6, and most corpsmen go in are E3, E4. So here I was, an E6, going through this. So they made me a platoon sergeant running this school.
Right.
And they put the only other E7 as a commander who just kind of was in the background, but I was the one pushing the troops in the school. And that's when, right away, after all my years of being out of the military, even being in Desert Storm, having any association at all with the Marine Corps made me feel like I am where I belong. Mm-hmm. Well, I took that to heart. There were 4 platoons going through the school, and I was, of course, the platoon sergeant for the one group. And we constantly had competitions against each other. Who got the best scores? Who got the best? So I took these guys and I cracked them the whip, and we were synchronized to the nth degree. And we didn't just come in to a classroom and sit down. I used a preparatory command and command of execution, like 4th platoon, take your seats. And then boom, everybody was down. All that kind of stuff. And I started making up cadences, and other groups were just, they were going from one place to another. Well, not us. Everything we did, I looked at the training plan for the next day, and that night I would work on the cadence songs that would talk about what we were doing.
Right.
And that was just kind of started building more and more of that feeling of being part of something bigger than myself, that feeling I had. And it was tough to get that in Vietnam when you're younger.
Right.
Not to mention other parts of life. And one of the neatest things that happened in the school is because there were so many people at it, and there was these 4 platoons, and everybody was hungry and everybody was working hard. We were out on the range, and another group was doing like biochemical warfare stuff or whatever. But everybody had to go back and turn their weapon in at the armory. And if you were second in line from another platoon in front of you, you were waiting for 100 people or whatever to get ahead, and they were going to eat chow before you. So one day, we're heading back, everybody's in, and we're going one direction, and I see off in the distance another platoon coming from another direction, and I knew we were going to intersect at exactly the same time and then have to take a right turn to get to the armory. So we're going along, and then there was a real, now I'm the acting platoon sergeant, but there was a real Marine sergeant there. Everybody had that. So how did I do that now? It was so funny. I go, column right, march, like half step, column half step. I made it some kind of a command, and I pulled everybody from the strict formation to take a column half right, and then I said, route step, hut. So then we could go with a route step, and we kind of I was pushing them, and we cut these other guys off. So you'd think that would have been all the drama, but it wasn't. Because keep in mind, these are real Marines running this school. Mm-hmm. So the platoon sergeant for the group that we cut off, he's all pissed off. And he comes over and starts hollering at our platoon sergeant. And before you know it, they're in a knockdown, drag-out fight.
Really?
Right there in front of everybody. So that all gets, they had to do a little, get their hand slapped, later.
But he's standing up for you.
Yeah. But that when we got all done and we're eating chow and we're about ready to leave, he just comes up to me and without talking too loud, he goes, Nice call, Doc. So we get through that. Okay, so I make it through the school, and I am a 8404 now, just like any other corpsman with the Marines, because I'd filled all the qualifications, and it was tough. Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton, running PT and chiggers, camping out. It was just what it was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. We get done on about August 8th, and that weekend we're running medical support for an air show in Sioux City. And this guy that I helped get through it, he was there, and I was just going to buy his little Mazda to get better gas mileage for me to go to work. And we were just talking about day-to-day life things. But less 2 weeks later, the world changed for everyone. Mm-hmm. 9/11. And I will say in my story with that, of course, those towers going down, it was unbelievable. But when they went into that, they hit the Pentagon, I go, game on, myself. There was no stopping me at that point. Mm-hmm. And because I was trained and ready, that's kind of what happened. And it was everything, we all get immediately on alert, and a lot of people end up getting mobilized, but some have to stay back behind, and I'm chomping at the bit, but I can't do anything about it. They just got to deal when you're called. And the first group of ours, they leave and go to Camp Pendleton, and I'm back here, and I'm just pushing troops, doing whatever I can, and we all have to do that in the military. It's not all glory or fun and games, or you definitely don't get what you want, mm-hmm. but you do what you have to do. And then after about a year almost, because this is right away, of course, everybody, there's movements in Afghanistan, but when we were getting ready to head into Iraq, I'm at the University of South Dakota in my office, and I had an account, my own USD account for email, but this topic comes up, and it was from the DOD out of Washington, D.C., and the text of the message was, "May God be with you. You will be at the tip of the spear." Within about 2 hours, my orders came in electronically.
There you go.
Right there, that day. So I'm mobilized. Mm-hmm. And I go to Camp Pendleton. And this group had been training, it was a reserve battalion, and they'd been boots on the ground training for almost a year already, from 2002 to right up to 2003. And it was one good thing that came from it is that Mad Dog Mattis, he got to see how good reserve people can operate. Because in this reserve battalion, the Marines were prison guards, sheriffs, and policemen. And the corpsmen were, paramedics, firefighters, had all kinds of experience. And in that course of their year training, they outperformed every other unit of the 5th Regiment. So when it came time for Mad Dog to call who he wanted to go, he had 2 of his own regiments, divisions from the 5th Regiment. They were active duty, but the 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines was with them. And that's where I was assigned to immediately. And after they'd been training a year. Well, I get, there, and I'm sitting at San Diego waiting to catch the bus to go to Pendleton, and this guy comes up to me, and he could tell that I was locked on with the Marines. I was ready to go.
Right.
And he comes and he goes, "Are you heading to the 2nd Battalion?" I go, "Yes." You got to help me here. I'm laying tile for the last 5 years. I didn't plan on ever getting deployed. I was working in the floor. Well, right away I saw, a couple of red flags.
Sure.
But anyway, we get there, and we're staging to get assigned to our units where we're at. And because of my rank being an E6, there's only one other E6 out of this whole 100, all these corpsmen, because it's lower ranking corpsmen that go in the field combat normally. I was slated to be in the headquarters, at the battalion aid station, to the back. But I went up to the E9, which is the same rank I was when I eventually retired. And I goes, Senior Chief, put me on the line. He goes, are you sure you know what you're talking about? Yes, I do. So I leave the cushy headquarters area, and I end up going to weapons company of the 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines for their right away. And I knew nothing about Marine Corps structure or anything. I just knew that I needed to be, if I was going to be deployed, I needed to be where let's say God meant me to be. Mm-hmm. Not that I was looking for anything any other way than just that importance of serving my country. Well, then the ball started rolling and things started happening in this very same day. The first thing is that I, as the E6 and the senior, they were appointing me the senior line corpsman for all the corpsmen that were going to be out in the field. And then there was this other E6, he was for the people at battalion aid station. They had to bring me to their officers to, be introduced and find out where I was going to be. So the first thing I do is I go to the major for our, for the weapons company. And he tells me, he said, Doc, the one thing I want you to do right now is make sure that all of your men know the first names of their people, the Marines, their wives' name, and the names of their kids. I want you as corpsmen to know these Marines so you can care for them. And then he opened up his mouth and showed where he had a bullet go through a round, took out in some conflict from 10 or 20 years before where a corpsman saved his life, and so he had a thing for corpsmen.
Wow.
But he took it serious. So that guy was intellectual, and he had a caring and feeling.
Right.
And then they took me into the next room. And this was our first sergeant. And our first sergeant had been a drill instructor with the Marine Corps for 13 years.
13?
Yeah.
Wow. I had no idea how long they do that. That seems like a long time.
He was tough. And he was shorter than me, so he had a Napoleon complex.
There you go.
Big time. But he's tough. And he could look at you and just cut you in half. That tough. And I'll try and do him justice here. He looked at me and he says, Doc, my Marines don't trust my corpsmen. Make it happen. Now keep in mind, they'd been training for a year.
Yeah.
And what had transpired was that some of these corpsmen, they were Navy, they got mobilized with these Marines, and they weren't up to Marine Corps standards. Their body fat was a little higher. They were a little softer. They weren't used to 10, 20-mile hikes. So they would catch the Humvee and the ride back. And when he said that, it was 5 minutes to 12. Mm-hmm. Before 1 o'clock, before 1,300 hours, I had gotten rid of 3 of them, told them to pack their bags and get out of there. And I went out like Jesus looking for disciples, and I picked out the men who were just recently assigned there, the ones I could feel had what it takes. One of the guys, and I'm going to say his name, Travis Mayo, when everyone else was going to take a break for chow, and we had to do that smallpox thing where you got to prick their, so many times, he stayed and would not quit until everyone was done. And he would just never was talking big, and he didn't even look like he was a big, tough Marine, but that guy had it. And men like him, And I brought him into a little room in a kind of we were just in a clinic area. So it takes, in our company, we had only 6 corpsmen and myself to take care of all these Marines going on the weapons company and this other thing. I mean, it was a lot of responsibility for just a few people. And I said, I want you to become part of the A team, the best team of corpsmen the Marines have ever seen. Well, then the magic started happening, but we're still stateside. And it isn't long, a couple days later, when I got them working and we're just doing a little training, finishing up our mobilization, getting everybody mobilized, ready to go, I decided that the night before we're ready to deploy and get on the plane, that I was going to move from my barracks, which was in the Marine Corps. If you're an E6, you're up there. You're a senior NCO.
Right.
So I had a pretty good cush digs on the living. But I went down to the slums of the barracks where these E3s were to stay with them.
Right. That shows them a lot.
It wasn't over yet. Because they all told me about this later. Because that night, I'm getting my gear. I just moved in, and there was one locker, maybe 4 rows from where they were at. And I just hadn't been there very long anyway, but I look over and they're all gathered around somebody. Come to find out, this person was the former leader of them who had backed out from going over. He got freaked out. His wife was having some medical problems. He said, I can't go, Anyway, here he had been training with these guys for a year, but he wasn't going. But he was still talking to them about their medical kit. Do you have regulations on your so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so? Well, I saw what was going on. And I didn't make a big deal in front of it, but I found out later these guys listened in, because I pulled this guy aside. And I said, I am taking these men into combat. You get out of here now. Mm-hmm. And that's how that started. And these guys, I had no idea that they had heard that, but I just knew what I had to do.
Right. And you wouldn't have heard any of that if you hadn't moved down in there.
Right.
To even see it.
That's just a lesson learned. Right, exactly. So we gear up, and we're going, getting ready to go. And one funny thing, this same guy, remember I told you about the guy, running floors? And, all he was doing is laying flooring. Well, we were issued, in Iraq with the open country, we're, as corpsmen, you're to only carry a defensive weapon. But our major he was insistent that an M16 was a defensive weapon on that range.
Right.
But this guy had chosen just to carry a 9mm with him. But he had a misfire with that 9mm right outside the barracks. He's just playing around with it. That's a bad sign. I had to get rid of him later. But Anyway, we get on the plane, we head over there, and we find ourselves in a place called Camp Coyote. That was the name of it. Mm-hmm. And it was just our Marine place to stage our gear in Kuwait. And we, is all it was, and Marines love an austere environment. So it was not like the Army where you could find a PX and this. It was just a rows and rows of GP medium tents. And at the end of the row of tents would be a weapons cleaning table, which is a table about chest high, and a chin-up bar. So every company of a couple hundred people would have that, the rows of tents, the chin-up bar, and the weapons cleaning table. We get there, and we're still doing not a whole lot of training because it isn't fun and games anymore. It's the real deal. People are getting acclimated to the weather, and we had days when the sand would blow, and in the GP medium tent, you could not see at the end of the tent. I mean, the people inside of the tent.
Yeah.
Is that way? But still.
Back to the stuff you're breathing all the time.
Yeah, right. I
Another
forgot
one.
about that.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
It's adding up, Larry.
Yes. Ooh, don't talk like that. So, a couple things happened. One is that this place that I was in a tent with senior NCOs on one side of the GP medium and the officers on the other side. So we were across the aisle from each other. Mm-hmm. And I called it the Viper Pit because these are Marines now. And depending on what day they were having or how things were going, you'd walk in there and they could just snap at you.
Right.
You know, but I learned real quick you had to snap back. You had to stand up for yourself. They were going to run you right over.
Right.
You know, well, one day, the same first sergeant who was so tough, you know, and so mean, he comes up to me and I don't think he put his hand on my shoulder, but he goes, "Doc, things are going all right with you," or something like that. And what I found out was that our company, out of the entire battalion, had the least amount of people going to sick call in the entire battalion because I had insisted that every corpsman check everyone's feet every morning, make sure they're doing every preventative thing they can. You not spreading, because you get people together and you're going to get dysentery and you're going to get this and that. But I made sure they stayed on top of it every second, and it showed. So that was the beginning of these corpsmen feeling good about themselves too. But again, this old first sergeant was taking a little different look at the corpsmen in general.
They noticed.
Yeah. So that was one thing. But as time goes on there, we're trained. There's no unit of any United States forces ahead of us to the Iraqi border. We are at the most northern point in Kuwait, getting ready to step off what's called the line of departure and move in. So it was UN resolution this, UN resolution that. Everybody was waiting to do what they needed to do, but it wasn't happening.
Chomping at the bit.
Chomping at the bit. So I come up with this idea that we were going to have a strong man on the desert competition. And with that, I just started coming up with ideas of pulling a pallet with MREs on it, pushing, doing jerry cans of water, racing with that. One four-man team of pushing a Humvee through the sand. And then if there was a tie, because I kept it like a score point, and it was like a competition of the sections of our company, the platoon. The tie breaker was this. You had to take a water bottle, 2-quart, not the little ones, but the 2-quart. We filled them full of sand, put your hands straight out in front over the weapons table, and whoever dropped was out. So then it was how hard, that's a mind over matter thing, which is a great, Marine Corps trait. And it got so loud of cheering that two things happened. The battalion commander come over to see what in the world was going on. That was kind of neat. But what was even better was that it was a time when they were letting reporters in with each battalion to check them out. Well, there was a representative from Stars and Stripes there, and they made a feature article in the European version of the Stars and Stripes about that whole thing of these guys doing all that just for a pack of bragging rights, kind of thing.
Yeah, because you got to stay busy. You can't just be there ready to cross the line week after week
and you
after
need
week.
Like a morale builder and everything. So that was how I did it with the whole group, and it worked. But was what I found out later that made the rounds as far as people talking about it. Because, I don't think I mentioned it on this thing, but I was according to our captain, the oldest line corpsman in the United States Marine Corps, boots on the ground. I'm 54 years old, shadow of my former self now. I was training hard then, bigger. But I made sure that I filled out that uniform, the sleeves, and I was, rocked, solid, ready to go. But that didn't convince anybody. Looks are deceiving.
Sure.
So what I started doing is because a lot of these Marines from other companies of the entire battalion, they had never really seen me or knew me, but we'd cross paths, and they'd go, "How old are you?" And I would become silent. Don't say a word. I'd just go, "Come here." And I'd take them over to the end of the row of tents, past the weapons cleaning table to the chin-up bar. And I'd just go, "Give me what you got." So they'd go up there, and whatever number of pull-ups they did, and I didn't care how many it was, I beat them always with one more pull-up. Whether it was 16 or 17, it gets tough when you got boots and utes and all your gears on and you're doing pull-ups. However, I wanted to do it. And that's what builds that credibility. Because what I told these corpsmen, and it went on from every one of my other deployments, when I would get my group of men together, and as I rose through the ranks from my second deployment and my third deployment, so I'm in charge of everybody's, I said this: you come into a Marine unit with instant credibility because of one thing, and that's all the corpsmen that have went before you. And the corpsmen in the United States Marine Corps, the Navy corpsmen, have the highest incident rate of Medal of Honor recipients of any rating or any branch of service. Navy corpsmen with Marine Corps units have the highest.
That is good to know.
It is.
I'd never
and
heard
if you
that
go
before.
if you're in a Navy chow hall and you want to check that out, in most chow halls I've been in, all of those Medal of Honor recipients with their picture and narrative are posted around the entire chow hall, which is a lot. I mean, so I said, you have instant credibility on day one, but it's up to you to gain that credibility on day two. You must be tactical. I won't let you out of here unless you can have your weapon as clean as any Marine. You have to be in the physical readiness state to not only take care of them, but to excel. You need to be someone that they can trust without question. And that means that you have to do the work from now on. And that's what this whole role of taking on that, and that's what it was just like meant to be. And I have to back up with one thing about that concept of being meant to be. How do you know for sure sometimes if you are where you're meant to be? Do you just think about it and you convince yourself? Now, here's what happened to me. I told you that I got assigned to this this company, a weapons company. And being unfamiliar with the Marine Corps structure of formation, I went with the Navy route, which puts you in formation from the tallest to the shortest, going down the line like that. So you got each rows like that. Well, I'm 5'0" with around Marines, corpsmen, so I am at the very end of the first row. That's where I just went myself. Not realizing that senior NCOs, E6s are all supposed to stand in the back. So that first night, evening, I'm there. And then there's commands to get us going. Hector Civil, dress right, dress. So as I'm looking to the right and I'm doing my dress right, there is nobody, of course, to my left. But I feel I look over and there's my father. For a split second, I felt and saw my father there. That's why I'm here today, still alive. And that's why I became Sailor of the Year. And that's why we took these men into combat and came out doing, what we needed to do for this country.
And now Sailor of the Year out of
87,000
people.
Yeah.
Number one on that. And you've talked about the A team. You've talked about the strength, how you helped them along with that. But you had something in your family that helped you do that.
Yes.
The ring.
Right.
That's in the book.
That's in the book.
Yeah. So you got to talk about the ring.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it brings up my father again. On the same day, before we went into Iraq, and these Marines were down in the dumps, and the strongman on the desert competition wasn't scheduled until later in that day, I could see the dejection of these Marines because they knew that politics was letting them down, or whatever it is that seems to always happen, I suppose. But I knew I had to do something. So I went up to these Marines. They were all strapping 6-footers, and young. I'd go to them and I'd look at them square in the eye and I'd say, "Marine, let me give you the power." They go, "The power? What's that, Doc?" I say, "Hold out your hand." So they would hold out their hand. "Give it to me." I say, "This ring is my father's ring. He was a Marine who wore it on Okinawa and Guadalcanal." And I touched their hand to it. Immediately, these Marines got taller and they stood up and they were proud because they were connected to the Leathernecks of World War II, that heritage that means more to them, I think, than any other branch of the service as far as prior,
I would agree.
So it's just that one thing. Well, we go through that and get into country, and I will, I don't know how much we're going to go through all of this, but I will say, people have probably read books about it, but I went through Nasiriyah. I called it the gauntlet because I never seen so much firepower going in and out my whole life, including Vietnam. And I had an ammo dump blow up by us there once. But we, went through that, and the next village down, when we took fire and had to do everything we had to do, we finished that engagement with the enemy that night. Now, we went through, our goal was to get on Highway 1, go through Nasiriyah, and make it up to eventually take out the Republican Guard in Tikrit through Baghdad, which we did. However, when we formed what's called a wagon wheel, which is just a way to protect yourself when you're out in the open, just like a real, wagon wheel of a covered wagon type thing, where you can be in the middle and there's guards around you. Once we had that engagement with the enemy, I'm just getting ready to resupply people and I'm busy doing my thing, but Marine after Marine came up to me and said, "Thanks for the power, Doc." That's all they could say.
That's amazing.
Turn away.
That's why I wasn't going to let you miss that part of the story.
That is real.
You've got so much stuff in your brain and so many stories.
Yeah, that's real.
That ring is amazing.
Time, goes on, and we're after our first I think it wasn't Nasiriyah, it was maybe after that I'll tell you, we were throwing some rounds down range, to where we expended our ammo can, and it's like a wooden, if you've seen not an ammo can, but like a case that holds the ammo.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about 2.5 feet high and 6 feet, square. So I come up with this idea because we're all out there doing our thing. When nature calls in the Corps, you don't have a place to go to. You have your shit trenches, your piss trenches, and blah, blah, blah. So I started taking these ammo cans, and I'd draw on them shit in and shit out so they could sit on top of it instead of just squatting. And just good things like that. So along with being a corpsman, it's body, mind, spirit. You cannot just take care of someone's, medical ills. You got to look at that whole person. So and how do you do that in a situation? It's not like the movies where you're in a firefight every day. You deal engagement with the enemy, you travel, you suck it up, you have to sleep in this goat shit and thistles, and then the next day get up and do it again. So I just started taking songs, familiar songs, changing all the words to them, and performing at night for these Marines and corpsmen. And I got a whole bunch of them. I got I'm sitting in Camp Coyote waiting for the war to start blues. I got hotel diarrhea. I have Iraqi road, you name it. It was just a way of kind of easing that tension. But still, we still had every day and things had to go on. And, don't forget this first sergeant that I talked about earlier.
Right.
Because he never let go of me either. He was always keeping his eye on me. So what I did on my own is I decided that I needed to be a tactical corpsman, not just part of the team, but in that team. And in a Humvee, we had a 50 cal mounted above us, and we're traveling. If you look back at the history of that whole thing, it was the largest blitzkrieg ever of a convoy on planet Earth that ever had taken place in the history of warfare. All of that armament had to go somewhere, and all those hundreds of miles up north, that took a lot of doing, but we had to, of course, refuel. So we were 18 hours a day, sleep deprivation, everything, but we had made it up far enough north where we were getting ready to go into Baghdad within a day. And by our unit's one of the first ones to go through there. We get into a fuel dump, and I'm on the gun because I had spelled our gunner out. And the same first sergeant, he sees me as a corpsman up on that gun. And of course, he goes, Doc, get the hell out that gun. You no business being up there. And as someone in the military who is conditioned, not just trained, but conditioned to follow orders, I said, no, First Sergeant, my gunner needs a break.
I remember you talking about this in the hog house when we were having the steak dinner talking about this,
Well,
but I didn't remember it was the first sergeant. I thought it was an officer telling you that.
So just to show you what, we're in the middle of, we don't have time to chit chat.
Right.
I didn't realize this until after we're all done, and I get invited personally to a Marine Corps ball where he's the keynote speaker, this first sergeant. He brought me there to tell everyone there exactly what it takes to be a corpsman, to do that. And all I was doing is just doing what I felt needed to be done. So that's how it went. And we went on, in that way. And, it is, I got to say, it's tough. I say that I have many a saying, when you get to be older than dirt, you can, share them. But technology changes war. And I can say that for a fact.
Very much.
Because Vietnam, Desert Storm, 3 tours over there. Technology changes war, but war never changes. There are always things that need to happen. And I called it, I was a chief. Chief T's, 3 T's of combat. Trust, teamwork, and training. The very number one thing is you have to trust those people around you. You have to work as a team. You can't do it by yourself. Then and only then do you fall back on your training to get something done. And that adage, it's not really an adage, it's a saying some people have, that when you really push comes to shove, you aren't necessarily fighting for that flag, you're fighting for that person on your right and your left. And I'll tell you for a fact that's true.
That's what builds what's behind the flag. If you didn't have that, the flag would mean nothing.
Well, I'll give you an example of that quick. When we did make it into Tikrit, and we took out the Republican Guard, the remnants of that Republican Guard, and that's what kind of gave me this.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. That was, just...
I'm glad you're leading into it.
That's how it is. But what I saw personally is that when soldiers are coerced and forced into taking a stand, when it really matters, they'll cut and run. Because that's what, when we went into Tikrit and took out that first, big shooting match in the Republican Guard, and I know because I had to cut the ammo belts off them after they've been sitting there too many days.
Yeah.
So I know, but however, we went through the first, perimeter of theirs into the area where they were at, and all you could see were little holes dug in the ground, like their own version of a fighting hole, with uniforms in it. They changed their clothes and went out. The people we saw, young 23-year-olds with nice black pants, white shirts, waving at us, they were in uniform the day before. Mm-hmm. But when we got there, they had nothing to hold them to that ground. And we did have interpreters. However, in Tikrit, Saddam Hussein, his hometown, they had a university there, and a lot of the people could speak English. And we heard, I was there when they would be interrogated. And one person who was a publisher of a local newspaper, he let us all know that he was still alive only because he knew what had to be done, because if he didn't, they'd already told him, you say one syllable against, us, and we will kill your wife and your children in front of you before we ever touch you.
Yep.
That's what they were living with.
It's a common tactic over there.
Yeah. Yep. Mm. So it's that kind of a, life that they lived in. And when we came back, I will say personally, I didn't like it when I saw the rules of engagement changing a little, because Marines, we had a kill zone, like 500 meters. And then I get home and I start seeing things happen over there where they breach a wire, and come across the and that would have never happened. But it was just hurting and hurting. But if you want me to, I can go into, from that deployment, how I ended up in the next one and then the following one, too.
Where does the Purple Heart lie in there?
Okay, thanks.
Wherever that lies.
You got to keep me going. So, when we were challenged to take out the Republican Guard, I was part of Task Force Tripoli. And anybody out there, if you're listening on your computer, go to your phone. If you're on your phone, go to your computer, whatever it takes. But look up Task Force Tripoli, like that Marine Corps, like Shores of Tripoli. Because Major Mad Dog Mattis, Major General Mad Dog Mattis formed this group of Marines from his entire regiment of the top performing sections of each battalion, getting right down to the nitty-gritty. Who are his top people? And we took the back roads out of Baghdad the night the statue fell, wound through that, and staged ourselves in front of the palace compound. And everything was supposed to kick off, I wasn't getting all the intel like the higher ranking, but I knew that we were to hold our fire until we were given the order, command, to move in. And we were staged about 5 meters, the guys were 5 meters apart, and every so often it would be a Humvee. And I not call myself a historian, but I love reading about military history. And I remember thinking, this is kind of like a strategy for the Civil War, like some kind of a single breast. We're going to move in, under darkness here. This is not knowing what to expect. Well, something happened clear down the end of the line where one round went off somewhere, and before you know it, it's chaos. It's like whatever World War III is going to sound like. I think I was there. Back when I could still hear, because now I got perforated eardrum and my blindedness eye. Anyway, the Humvee that I was by, our men were staged, some over the hood, backside. I was on the backside, and it was canvas back then before they hardened them. we got set up kind of because out in front of us, real close to the compound, was a 16-foot bed truck with a tarp on it. And what the deal was is they had armament in there. The whole truck was full of armament. So the guys, the Iraqis, in the second floor of the compound, they fired a French-made rocket-propelled grenade at that truck. It blew up. It blew up everything. The truck.
I could imagine.
The whole thing, from what I saw when I came to, is the shrapnel and the engine parts and the kind of half melted, but there was nothing bigger than the size of a marble. Mm-hmm. Just bam. And I can just kind of feel that. It was like getting hit with a baseball bat wide open, and when I came to, I had like a metallic taste in my mouth and a little bit of fluid running down there, and it's dark yet. And I just gathered my stuff together and started working with the peripheral bleeding, because we all had good armor plating, which is great. Mm-hmm. So it was extremities and things, So that's how this all happened. And the thing I will say, as much as I love the Marine Corps, when it comes down to administrative things, it's dogs and cats between the Marine Corps and the Navy when you get stateside again. Just can't be helped, because it has to be that way. So because I was a corpsman and had filled out paperwork for when someone had to get medevac, for the Purple Heart, I didn't do anything for myself at all. I just kept going. A little rough. I knew things were different, weren't, quite the same, but I could never let that stop me. And I never did. Until later, clear after my third deployment, when a commander at the Wounded Warrior Barracks at Camp Lejeune, when I was getting everyone demobilized, he took one look. He told me later, he said, I took one look at you and the way you were acting, and I knew you've been through the shit. There was something wrong here. And that's when they made me do I had avoided a physical exam, because I wasn't born yesterday. I couldn't see out of this eye. My ear was ringing.
Right.
And I just made sure nobody ever come near me. And I could have controlled that because I was a corpsman until he caught me. He went and got my medical records. Then he had me go to Wilmington and do a neuropsych exam. And then they did an MRI and they saw the scarring on the brain and all that. So then that's when this come about later.
So did you have shrapnel that blinded you in that
no,
left
it was
eye? Or because
purely,
it looks fine.
It was purely the concussion. And I have to think it was because I was on the opposite. This Humvee caused like a canister. And when it went through that concussed air that close, that's what an IED can do. And it just flattened me. It's just like I was hit, but with something invisible, almost.
Yeah, I've seen different size, like air cannons.
Well, when
concussion that it can send out.
I've went through quite extensive advanced combat medic training, and I don't know if it's legal to say, so I'm just hypothetically saying that pigs are brought out off of military compounds and corpsmen are given the opportunity to work on them after they've been shot. Now, that's strictly hypothetical.
Right.
Okay, well, we got that clear. But when that pig would be put in a vehicle and blown up like I was, or you couldn't see a mark on him except he was solid red, and then the organs were cooked on the inside. So hey, there's something going on there.
Yeah.
So, but that's, just by grace of God, I have an alive day of April 13th, 2003.
Yep.
Don't make a big deal about it, even though I do wear it because, I got tattoos all over me because I was in the Corps, and talk about a value-driven outfit. Well, you don't put on tattoos unless you have values in my book. It's got to mean something to you.
Right.
So that's how I just. Now my wife has a different story about it. She doesn't care for it and thinks the second when I did all this over here, she goes, "That's going to cost you a diamond necklace." 'Cause this side so I was worth too much more. So
Yeah, because tattoos have changed. They've morphed over the years, but
yeah,
in the very back, I think you definitely described the meaning. Because I know a lot of younger people have tattoos, but most of them can tell you the reason why they have
Yeah.
it. Maybe it's not as dramatic as that, but they still have their reasons. But you see a lot more tattoos than you used to. But military, you always seen the tattoos.
oh yeah. So I could go into how, but anyway, it's all good.
Yeah.
So I, with going through that first push into Iraq, I come back, and I found this out a little bit later. But when I reported to Sioux Falls to my medical unit again, I came the first day back in my Marine Corps digis because I was locked on Navy Corpsman with the Marine Corps. And they some officer tried to get me to change my uniform right there that day, and I wouldn't do it. So this new commander, for our unit, he just had never met me in his life, but he told me later, he said, "I just noticed something different about this guy." So I had to go check him out. Well, he got my service record, found out the unit I was in, called back to Camp Pendleton and talked to my company commander and this first sergeant. And something
Nice.
took a life of its own that I had no idea about. It went through 5 levels until the 5th one when I was made aware of it. But I was nominated for Sailor of the Year on paper first. Then it goes through these different levels. Then they do the interviews. And then finally it gets to the point where the top 5 Navy E6s in the Navy, like in our particular case, it was all the entire Navy Reserve, were they selected the top 5, and this is out of that 87,000 eligible, and we were sent down to the Navy Reserve headquarters in New Orleans, and for a solid week, we were all 5 of us were evaluated by an E9, which is the highest enlisted rank.
Right.
They followed us 24/7, virtually. Each one of us, they kept their notes on us, but we were evaluated on military knowledge, military etiquette, military bearing, physical readiness, and we were subjected to a board, a panel, every day comprised of different people from D.C. drilling us, that's that type of a thing. And it went on for 7 days.
I've never heard of something like that going for that. I had no idea.
Oh, yeah.
I've been involved in plenty of boards and
But I guess
nominations,
when
but
you get
nothing
to
like that.
when you get to that, I guess to that level, if you're going to be called a Sailor of the Year,
Yeah.
The sailor, and they had one for the Pacific Fleet, Atlantic, and the coast, but I was the one, for the Reserve Fleet. So they there's a rating a badge, I'll call it that for now, that had just been formulated as far as being able to earn it, and it was called a Fleet Marine Force Warfare Device. And I was one of the first people to go through and pass the testing for that. And what it is, it's an indication. You wear this proudly above your ribbon rack, but it signifies that you know as much as any Marine about anything that they're supposed to know, plus you have the medical capabilities to take care of them. I mean, it deals with everything, the physical qualifications. I mean, it's a tough course. And out of these Sailors of the Year, 3 out of the 5 had been in combat in Iraq, I was being one of them, that had this Marine Force Warfare Device. So with a C of white in front of us with all, this is the top people at the Pentagon and wherever they're coming there. They're announcing the winner. And the night before, Admiral John Cotton he's the commander of all Navy Reserve Forces. He knew that I was going to be selected as the leader, but I didn't know it, of course. And he sat with us at our table and was just talking about the future of the Navy. And he said several things. He said, I have looked President Bush in the eye, and I know he cares about us. You know, that kind of thing. Anyway, the next day, when they make this, and there's 3 out of the, because being a corpsman is so elite and it is so tough, 3 out of the 5 up for Sailor of the Year were Fleet Marine Force corpsmen that served with the Marine Corps. Because you just don't get any better than that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's how they began the announcement. The 2004 Reserve Force Sailor of the Year is, HM1 FMF, which fit 3 of us. Then they said my name. Well, immediately, this Admiral Cotton, he says, because he knew, he goes, I'm sure the professor would like to come up and say a few words.
The professor.
Because, enlisted with a doctorate, I mean, it's just not an everyday thing, probably. So with no prompting, with no even forethought whatsoever, because I was just glad to be there. I never planned on, having to just say anything. He said, I'd like to say a few words. So I get up before, this microphone, and it's hundreds of flag officers and people. He said, and I just said, I stand before you today filled with both humility and pride. I am humble because I know the only reason I have received this honor is because of those I've had the privilege to serve and those I've had the honor to lead. But I stand here with pride because I know I am part of the world's greatest Navy.
That is amazing.
So,
in front of all those people. Is that, I presume, the first time you've ever addressed that many?
Yeah.
Not alone
like that.
who's there, but that
Yeah,
many.
but it was just, to me, I can still remember every word of it because it came from the heart, and I mean it. And, that's the neat thing about if you live your life, and I hope we get down a chance to talk about life in general and how it applies, but, if you live your life vowing to do the right thing when you get up in the morning, and then do a little check on yourself at night, you can kind of keep that path straight and narrow. And that's just what's important for, again, to be a good military leader. You can spot them a mile away if they're out for just their own self-promotion. Mm-hmm. That's obvious the very first time either the shit hits the fan or there's something where it involves teamwork, or giving up of yourself. Yeah, so.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned in part 1, you being that little kid, getting your dad's army blanket, practicing, trying to bounce your quarters as a little kid. That's where it started.
Yeah. So it just
pretty amazing.
Keeps going, and it didn't end because, as you said, I leave that first deployment, and I go, I'm not too long later, I'm selected Sailor of the Year. Well, the very unit out of Sioux Falls here that I was attached to, they get mobilized. And that mobilization was in 05, virtually the whole year of 05, because I was with Joint Military Forces, you being in the Air Force, myself, Navy corpsman with the Marine Corps. That's what we had, because we were on an Army base. I was on Camp Arifjan there in Kuwait. That's where I was assigned to the Fleet Hospital 5. We had to stay the year, because of that. Because it wasn't just a short deployment. It's kind of coincide. So I again made up my whole being was going to be to help these corpsmen become better, and of course to take care of my superiors. And that meant my company commander and the old gunny, the E9, our gunner's mate, who had no medical training, but he was really good with weapons. And I just became his right-hand man and solved problems for him just worked with that. Well, so here I went from E6, E7, like in a matter of, like overnight. That was a meritorious promotion to E7. I get deployed, and I'm only E7 for just not even 2 years, whatever, and lo and behold, it comes time for going up for E8, for the senior enlisted for that. And because of the meritorious promotion, timing-wise, by 1 month, because that whole year, I became eligible to go up for E8. And there were 14 of us. I got to get a drink of water here.
Yeah, have at her. I'll do the same thing.
Okay, you can edit this out.
No need for that.
Okay, thanks. So, there were 14 people up for E8, and one was going to get recommended to go up before the package put to DC. And because they went in time of service, length of time of rate, I'm number 14, the 14th one.
Right.
And keep in mind, there's chiefs there that have been chiefs for 10 years or that, whatever. So the board asked me the final question. They probably asked everybody, where should we rank you? And I didn't even pause. I said, you should rank me number 1. And here's why. And I proceeded to tell them why.
Mm-hmm.
That I was already acting like an E8. I was doing this, that, blah, blah, blah. So everything all happens. Pretty soon I find out I get promoted to E8. Mm-hmm. And then a neat thing happened where I was asked by the Pentagon Personnel Bureau of Medicine for the Navy to go to Washington, D.C. and work for the medical officer of the Marine Corps in a program called Marine-Centered Care, which had been going on for about 15 months. And it was supposed to be done in 18 months, but nothing had happened.
Oh, no.
So they go, okay. They wanted to put an E9 in, and then I found out later they said, you don't need an E9 in there. You needed someone who wants to be an E9. So they sent me to D.C. thinking that this was going to be a big perk for me. And you can imagine the honor, of doing it. However, I'm from South Dakota, and the population of Washington, D.C. increases 500,000 during the day. And I had to fight that traffic.
Inside the Beltway.
And I couldn't take it anymore. I was crossing the river on the boat, and I go, the traffic, like a cattle car and a subway thing. So finally, I just gave up and moved over in the Arlington side and a mile away and just tried to keep it simple. But it was really something. I learned a lot about the responsibility that people have. My desk was right across from someone whose sole job was trying to keep the Kevlar, the helmet, ahead of the curve on IEDs. How important is that?
Right.
And so there would be the duties where I would kind of represent the admiral and go out on a dog and pony show and have everybody kind of shaking in their boots. That was kind of fun. Looking at inspecting and things.
Exactly. So you kind of glossed over it. Your education.
Oh.
Talk about your education and progression through and the degree you ended up with.
Okay.
You really glossed over that. Larry.
Yeah.
I caught it.
Okay. Don't go, oh no, here, but I got to start back. When I went to country school, I was in the 3rd grade, the only student in my grade. And I can still remember that teacher showing me how to read and everything. And I just kind of kind of advantage. So I went through, and no one in my family ever had attended college, and I sure didn't plan on it. But when you get desperate enough, and you get tired of lugging beef and laying on the ground thawing out hog heaters
After years.
Yeah. So right before Desert Storm, I went back to school and got my undergraduate degree. And that's when I student taught at Alcester. Got in this mode of being around kids and making a difference. And I just kind of got fired up about that as a good thing. Well, when I got my master's degree in health education, then I started setting my sights on the star up at the top. What can I do to really make a difference? And my wife, Darlene, bless her, she's the one who that PhD, put heavy through thing. I was working full time at USD, taking classes all night, and then driving home, going back and forth. But I knew that that's where I meant, again, like meant to be. And I was able to earn that degree, a doctorate in education, and begin formulating just methods and ways that students could truly make a difference in a classroom, with others. So that was my calling too. It was one of the very few. One person told me I was one of the very few singing powerlifters, but I gotta say, how even more rare is being in education and serving, in the military too. So when I went through and got that, degree, it opened up doors, and I would recommend anyone to stick that out. If you have a goal, just that thing of never giving up is a positive, role that we can grab onto and use it if we need to from time to time.
Very cool. Yeah, I wasn't gonna let you not talk about that.
Yeah.
Let the professor speak.
Well,
yeah.
I did find that vice versa. I was able to use my experience in the military to help me in the classroom in this regard. I was master training specialist in the Navy, sent to a special school where they taught you all the ins and outs, the nuts and bolts, to be an instructor for the Navy. It's a little different than the philosophical ivory tower stuff.
You think?
Yeah. In other words, you put your plan, your lesson together, and you have terminal objectives, enabling objectives, points to, and they're assessed, and there's a standard of excellence that has to be met. And just give you an example how high that can be. I mentioned that I was an 8404 corpsman and how tough that school was.
Right.
Well, I didn't let you know this part. We had a 100-question multiple choice test every other day, every 48 hours at 6 o'clock in the morning.
6 a.m.
And if you did not score 80% or higher on that test, you were immediately sent back to San Diego to the airport and shipped out that day.
Man. Give us an idea about how many people are going through that at once.
Yeah, the attrition rate was pretty high. We might have lost half of everybody by the time it got done because in the orders that we had, you had to come, and it was kind of odd. I'd never seen it before. I remember this is clear back in, right before 9/11. My plane ticket was $1,500 flying out of Sioux Falls. That was because at any moment they could send you out of there and get you home. But we had to wear PT gear under our civilian clothes because when we got off the bus at Pendleton, immediate PT test right there on the spot.
Wow.
If you didn't pass it, it was the Navy one. Later we had to do the Marine Corps one. But if you couldn't pass the PT test, including the body fat, they didn't want you. So you got to, I've always said one of the neatest slogans I've ever learned was from the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, the highest ranking #1 enlisted person. I stayed in his house for a while when I was a Sailor of the Year for that week when they were whining and dining us. Mm-hmm. He signed every email at the bottom with his slogan, "Standards are not standards unless they're enforced." I've used that a lot. Well, getting back to standards, here I was a master training specialist in the military, and I go back to the classroom. And you've got this, people can, any faculty member, they can write their own syllabus. They can do it, they don't, how they assess you, whatever is up to them. Mm-hmm. And let's hope it's good, but not for me. When I walked into a classroom, and I hope some of my former students are out there somewhere and can go, yeah, that's right. I wore my same OD green watch that I used as a platoon commander to keep formations going. I would tell every student day one I was there to give them their money's worth. And I let them know that their world in this room ran off this watch. And when the second hand hit the 12, it's down to business. Well, most of them believe me. Some of them didn't.
Most.
Because I come back off one of these deployments, and you don't change overnight when that feeling like that. So I got an 8 o'clock class, meets Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. Well, before you know it, spring football starts, and it's at the Dakota Dome. And I got a lot of majors in my field I was in, at the Dome, because that's where I was teaching health and stuff. So the class gets going, and about the first or second or third day of spring ball, 6 of these football players walk in, maybe a minute late. They walk in, and without flinching, I just was back in, I go, "You front row," and I put them all in the front row. So I finished my lecture, and it was crowded. So the whole thing gets done, and they're going to leave, and I just couldn't help it. This is a military hand signal for stop. So I stopped them. And I said, "What part of accountability do you not frickin' understand?" And I didn't say frickin'. Mm-hmm. Well, 5 of them, they all come up with excuses, but the one guy goes, "I'm sorry, coach. I'm sorry, coach." But it was just I was just doing it mainly for a object lesson.
Sure.
Because it's, there. However, I was able to take some of those things of structure and classroom discipline and put it over in an area where sometimes, no matter if you're in college or not, you might need that. Mm-hmm. And I will. This is another example with that of education. I was working in this division of technology, education, and training, and we were having problems we had one part of the whole system where graduate students were receiving a stipend to, get 2/3 reduction in tuition, but they had to perform work to do it. And come to find out, I was gone on deployment, when I come back, that this whole organization had never been really watched over, and there was a whole stack of around 20-some projects in 3-ring binders that had been started, but they weren't finished. Yeah. They wanted somebody to fix that.
Probably slightly started, probably.
Yeah, slightly started, because these guys had their own homework to do and everything.
Right.
So my chair at the time puts me in charge of this outfit. There was 12 graduate students and 20-some undergraduates that were also getting a stipend to work 10 hours a week to do work. So it was on a Thursday night. I stayed that night, and I took this whole thing and turned it into a Marine Corps organizational structure. I had one grad student and 2 undergraduates would form its own little fire team. And then this one. So I had all these different groups. Any graduate students that were extra, I put them on an echo recon. They were doing research. So this graduate student and the two undergraduates were given a binder with the instructions to turn in a report to me at 12 o'clock every Friday of their progress, because I need to turn a report into my boss at 3 o'clock. Well, something magical happened. After about 4 weeks, I had to call a meeting at 3 o'clock. And they were all moaning and groaning because, God, what is he going to make us do now? I had an award ceremony. I took some of my old, the nice, colorful booklets that your citation comes in. I took that out, wrote up a new one, and commended like Fire Team Alpha for completing this assignment and getting it done. And then that's when the magic just, like somebody waved a wand, it just began taking a life of its own, and people took pride in the work. Before you know it, we have all these things done, and we're getting bigger contracts, and it was because of my military background.
Yeah, because when you were telling me that over steaks in the hog house when we were just discussing the beginning of this, you told us, told Paul and I that, and I thought that was pretty amazing. And they were doing a lot of heeing and hoeing and complaining and stuff. But then, did you have a cake also?
Yeah.
On the,
well, that's a whole
the first one.
Well, this was a class where I was teaching, where the class I was at, it had 400, it had seniors and graduate students in it, and it was a leadership course in recreation. Well, I scrapped that book, and the course. I took the syllabus as far as whatever they had for the credential, textbook before. That went out the window. I ordered every student in the class Leadership Lessons of the Navy SEALs, which is a book by Jeff and John Cannon, Navy SEALs. He was a SEAL lieutenant, John, and Jeff was a businessman in California. And those are lessons, how you learn about delegation, accountability, all those things. So when this class got going, I saw the opportunity. And we had one Marine who was a real-life sergeant, E5, who got out. I appointed him to be the platoon leader, which you have to be in E6. So I meritoriously promoted him in the classroom, bringing the dean of education. I had the cake and the whole 9 yards, and I promoted him to the sergeant. I had each one of these graduate students, they were the squad leader, because there would be like the E5, and then the whole row of undergraduates was their people to work with. And I let everyone know this. So number one, no one in here is getting an individual grade. You will all get the same grade as your team, because you're going to work, in a team here. And then I also, with that, I said, we are going to make a difference in the lives of others. And the only way to do that is to do it. So that's when I come up with a whole way. These students were out doing things, I had a lot of work at getting the grading separated. But when I left the very first day, after I turned it over to this graduate student who was the new sergeant, staff sergeant, I said, this is the same thing that I told groups of corpsmen when I would be in front of a formation. I looked at these students and I said, if you ever see me again, it's going to be for something either really good or it's going to be really bad.
Yeah.
And that's what I would do. I would meet with this graduate student before class, lay out the parameters of what I wanted, go through it. He'd give me an accountability. I'd do some assessment, talk to Gretz. It was just, but these, and then of course, every once in a while, I would come in and do some congratulatory thing or give out a little citation or mention of someone doing extraordinary work. That was just how it went for me. But I have to say that can be a learning process. Now I'm hitting this stuff.
That's okay.
Knock that out. This is something that needs to be said. if anyone is wondering why there might be a problem in the disparity between people coming back in the military and fitting into civilian life, I have the answer. And it was given to me my young captain who's now a colonel. It's this. From time immemorial, there have only been two types of cultures functioning: guilt-based and shame-based. Now, what does that mean? That means when you do something, if you're an Anglo-Saxon American, you're not going to steal something because that's wrong. Okay? But if you're a shame-based Spartan warrior, you are going to steal whatever you have to do to bring your buddies home or to accomplish that mission. Now, because we are, in this society of guilt-based, and we got plenty to feel guilty about, I get it. Mm-hmm. The examples given to me by my captain are this. The true warrior cultures, and he listed some of them. The Spartan warrior, where when these warriors came home, their mothers told their sons before they ever left, you better be coming, if you're not carrying your shield, you better be laying inside of it, because you got to fight to the death. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, you're shunned. That's good. So there's the, the Spartan, the Zulu warrior. If you look at their fighting habits and look at the history of what they did, and Lakota Sioux.
I'd heard that.
So when and it's real, and you wonder, and it's not a made up number. Whether we have 22 soldier, military men like you and I, committing suicide every day. I hurt, and I have some friends at the VA, one of them in particular, who I went through a lot of stuff with him, and him and I became compadres. We'd meet with these returning units years ago and give them a heads up on what to do next. He was a high enough rank and enlisted like you, as far as E8 and E9. He was with a forward unit that dealt with the Iraqis. And so he was not embedded with a unit, but he saw all the fallout of things not working. And he had, out of his small group of 12 men that were doing what he had to do and see what he had to see, he had 3 of them commit suicide.
Oh, man.
One of them on the phone while he was talking to him.
Really?
So why do people have to, you go to the whole thing of mental health? It's different, isn't it? You got getting shot at in the jungle where you can maybe see the enemy, maybe not, but then you go to a definite unseen enemy. You're sitting in a Humvee or a vehicle 9 times waiting for it to go black on the 10th. It takes a toll.
Mm-hmm. And you've come home twice.
Yeah.
Dealing with that.
So we can, it's just the whole, you brought up the topic of education. Well, I'll just leave at this part right now. How long, is when you're a senior NCO and like in a situation like that, you got to have comm with the rest of your people. So I'd have a little handheld radio right here, and everyone had a handle. Well, what do you think mine was? Here, they didn't know me from Shinola. I just show up. Word spreads on the street that I got this doctorate in education, so I'm the Renaissance man.
The Renaissance man.
Until one day, we take fire from a second floor. This scenario played out many times over again, but this highway, it would be an oiled highway with not even a village, but buildings on one side, 2 stories high. We'd take fire from that, and then we had to do our evasive maneuvers, get down in the low ground, but try and find a berm, and get ready to return fire and lay them down. Lay them down. Well, this happened, but I'm up behind the berm, and I look back, and there, the driver for our vehicle, he's standing out by the vehicle. There's rounds flying all over. He didn't know what to do, but he was standing up by the vehicle.
Oh man!
And you talk
Frozen.
about an anal sphincter moment. I went down, got down, went over and grabbed him, come back and pulled him over to this berm. Then we finished business that next day, and I still have it in my war room. When you come down, I'll show it to you again. But these guys got together and found a piece of cardboard and changed my handle to Devil Doc, which is the highest compliment. There is no higher compliment.
I can imagine.
If a Navy corpsman is called Devil Doc, and the Marines call you that, you can't get any higher.
There you go. Devil Doc. I like that.
So, I don't know where we need to head here, my friend, right now.
Yeah.
How long have we went so far?
We're at about 90 minutes, about where we wanted to be.
Okay.
With part one was a little bit less than that. Part two was right near that. And we've covered, I had this is the cover letter that I made trying to get you on the podcast down south. They're just real busy. I don't know if they will. But looking at all these bullet points, and I'm just skimming through them right here. We've covered most of them, and it is amazing. It is here to here for bullet points, and each one of them has its own story, much more than what this man has told you today. But just an amazing thing. I want to thank you so much for doing this. This podcast is just getting started. Your part one is going to be number 5, and part 2 is number 6. And like I said, it's just the Hog House Chronicles. I've put out little videos on what the Hog House is. Basically a rec room, cowboy bar right on my place. Got a studio in the back and a bar studio in the side.
Yeah.
And it's a little warm in there in the summer. Like we said, it's July 3rd today, and flies, kind of thing. It's a great place, but I like it when it's cooler.
Well,
so the Alliance here was just very gracious in letting us come here, and I've seen the president of the board of directors walk by here.
Oh, nice.
He was down there eating when we were eating there too.
Oh, okay.
He's a JAG out the Air Guard base.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure he's the chairman of the board. Very instrumental in getting this place going.
Well, I got to say this, Jimbo. Thank you for having something like this, because if you're facilitating telling the story about America, about what makes it great, but the people in it, and it follows my own firm belief. I got to say it's a belief that we have to keep telling these stories. And I've mentioned this time and time again, anytime I get a chance, about the importance of telling, this story that we have to tell, because of that remembrance, because the Native Americans have a great saying, and it is this, that everyone dies twice. First, when your heart beats no more, and the second and final time when your name is never mentioned again. Well, if you can take something like your podcasts, which can theoretically can last forever, you have saved something that will be gone if it's never mentioned again. So thank you for doing that.
You bet. Thank you. It's my pleasure. And I mentioned on a few of these that just the general statement is it only takes 3 generations to be forgotten. But I like this, the way you put it, much better. And this is a way to help preserve stories.
Okay.
Real life stories.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. I'll let you get a drink there. You're a lot drier than what I
I'm
am.
drier. I gotta stand up and drink. Oh, thank you.
But
I'd
thank
like
you
to
very
help
much.
you for a while.
Appreciate
Load
it.
up because it's a lot of work
Oh,
before I head out.
yeah, that won't be any problem. That was fun.
9/11. You know, when that, I'll tell you what, when they hit the Pentagon, it was game on for me. There's no way I was going to let my life go without being part of that fight.
Right.